My name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor, and I'm on a mission to rebuild and restore this 109-year-old classic sailing yacht, Tally-Ho. The next stage of the project is to make and install the beam shelves and the stringers, which are large internal structural members of the boat. Before I actually make them though, I've got to fair the inside of the frames in the areas where those beams are going to go to make sure that they can sit nicely against every frame. As well as fairing the frames, I want to double check the position of each one and move them if necessary to reduce the amount of fairing that has to be done later on. So what I'm doing here is trying to make sure that each set of frames is in the right position. That's in terms of its distance away from the centerline. So I've got this tick stick here, which is as long as the boat is wide, and in the center I've got the centerline marked, and then on either side I've got the positions of the outside of each frame marked on both sides. So I've just finished checking and adjusting the position of all of the frames. The process for adjusting them is to take a laser level and set it up on the centerline of the boat. I set up the tick stick on the laser that marks the centerline and then check with a square the outboard edge of each frame. But if it's a little bit inboard of where it should be, then I push it out a little bit. There's 44 sets of frames, including the fashion pieces, so it took quite a while. Everyone had to be checked. But I'm finally happy with the position of all the frames, which is great. So now I'm going to go ahead onto the next stage, which is starting to fair the top of the inside of those frames, ready to take the beam shelves. So now that I've faired the tops of the frames as much as I think I need to, or at least I'm bored of doing it, the next stage is to make the beam shelves, of course. They're going to be made out of these Angelique beams behind me. These were imported from Suriname with the planking stock. Each beam at the moment is just over 6.5 by 3 inches. The beam shelves and the stringers are going to have a join near the middle of the beam, so there's going to be 2 of these bits of timber to each longitudinal member inside the boat. They're long enough that I should be able to stagger those joints a little bit, and I've got enough of them that I can make the beam shelves, the stringers, and I've got 2 spare in case I break any. Although if I don't break any, I do have a plan for them. So the first thing to do is just to lay them all out as I've done, and I'm going to be looking at the pieces now and finding which ones are most appropriate to use where. As you can see, when timbers like this come out of the mill, they often have some bend to them already, and so I'm going to be trying to use that to my advantage. Alright, so I've selected the timbers that I'm going to be using for the beam shelf. I've mostly selected them based on their shape, so the ones which have the most curve on them will be the easiest to put in, but also based on defects. There was one which I was going to use which had quite a big check all the way down it, so I'm not using that one. The next thing for me to do is cut the scarves and join them together. I've got a little bit of extra length to play with, but not a lot. I don't really want to mess them up because these beams probably cost about $400 each. But they're actually a lot more valuable to me than that now, because if I messed it up and needed more, I wouldn't be able to ship them in individually. I'd have to use a whole shipping container again, and it would take a long time and hold up the rest of the boat. So it's pretty vital that I don't mess these up too much. Right, so I've now cut the first part of each of the beam shelf scarfs. These two pieces which I've been working on are both going at the back of the boat. Now they're actually upside down, so they will form the top part of the scarf joint. I spent a bit of time working out where I would put the joint. Obviously I only have so much leeway within that because I only have so much extra length on the pieces, which isn't very much. The original scarf joint was adjacent to the mast. I wouldn't be able to have it that far forward because of the length of these timbers. And anyway, I think it's better to move joints like this away from the mast area where there's a lot of extra strain. Now I decided to move it back as far as I possibly could with the length of the timbers I've got, so that I would get it clear of the chain plates which hold the rigging which holds the mast up. In this area where the chain plates are, there's a lot of upwards force, and I would rather that strain wasn't pulling directly on the joint, even though most of the strain is going to be on the frames of the boat, not on the beam shelf. That's also the reason I put the after pieces on the top part of the joint, so that it's locking down the forward piece of the beam shelf. And that forward piece is the piece which is going to be in the area of the chain plates, have a little bit more upwards force on it. So the most challenging part of the beam shells is going to be putting them inside the boat and getting them to the right shape. Now if this is the beam shelf, then it has to be curved around the inside of the frames like so, but it also has to be edge set to match the shear, and what that means is to bend it in this dimension. Now obviously edge setting a piece of timber, bending it in this dimension, is a lot more difficult than just bending it in this dimension, and the timber is more likely to break or buckle. Edge setting these huge timbers, which are 6.5 by 3 at the moment, is definitely going to be a real challenge. The other thing I could do is, when I cut the second part of the scarf, I could just break this a sec. I could cut it so that the pieces join together a little bit like that. That's exaggerated, of course. This would help me get some of the shear of the boat into the beam, but of course I would then have to smooth that out to make it a fair curve on the top and the bottom, and what that would mean is that I would be reducing the depth of the beam. Now that wouldn't be the end of the world, and I probably will have to do that a little bit, but obviously I'd like to do it as little as possible. So I think to check how I need to cut the scarf and to see exactly how bendy these pieces of wood actually are at the moment, I'm going to do a little experiment. Well, I know it's pretty dark, but what's going on here basically is I've got one of these beams set up with a jack underneath it, and one end is under the back of my truck, one end is under the back of the forklift, and I'm just going to put some pressure on it, on the jack, and see how much I can edge set it. It's quite possible, of course, that it's just going to lift my truck up, but I'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Well, as you guys hopefully just saw, that actually worked pretty well, and I was able to put quite a lot of edge set into this timber. Remember, this is Angelique, a very dense, heavy, tough tropical hardwood, and the piece is 6.5 inches by 3 inches, so 6.5 is the dimension that we're bending here, and I think I managed to put at least 6 or 8 inches of edge set into it there without too much effort. Well, there was a 20-ton jack involved, but still, it's quite reassuring to me that the timber can bend that much. I didn't hear any creaking that would indicate it was getting close to its breaking strain there. So I'm confident that the timber can take it. Of course, this is partly because the timber is very green, and that makes it more flexible, and there's a good reason to use green timber for something like this. Getting it into the right position on the boat and in the right shape is still going to be really, really challenging, and I'm still nervous about it, but this has given me just a little bit of reassurance that it might be possible, at least. It also means that I can scarf the two pieces of the beam shelf together straight rather than cutting an angle into that joint. because I'm more confident that I can get all the bend that I need, hopefully through bending the wood itself.
Like that. Can't him hurt.
The other one just jumped up. So I've just transferred the shape of this scarf joint onto the forward piece of this port side beam shelf. This forward piece is going to be the longer piece, and it's going to be locked underneath the aft piece. The chain plates are going to be a little further forward, pulling upwards, so this will be locked down. And there's always a lot of considerations when choosing which pieces to put where. The natural curve of the timber and using that to advantage in both dimensions. Also knots and natural defects. There's a few pieces with some shakes in, there's a few pieces with some sapwood on the edge which I'm trying to minimize, and there's some knots here. It's always nice, like here, when it's possible to discard the knots in the offcuts. So by shifting this piece just a couple of inches, I've managed to keep this knot out of the piece that I'm using. And also locating the nibs of the scarf over the frames. So there's quite a bit of measurement going on to make sure that the scarf is the right length, it's 4 foot long, and that the nibs can both rest over frames, and it's going to be long enough to reach the stem and the stern post. So now it's time to cut it out. Okay, well the first scarf joint has come together quite nicely. I'm quite pleased with the fit. For a first fit, it's pretty good. I'm going to try not to be too precious about these joints because as this timber is very green, the joints are likely going to open up as the timber dries out later on. And that's something that's quite common in old wooden boats. You often see, particularly in the beam shells and the stringers, that the scarf joints have opened up a little bit, and that's, I think, because it's very common to use green timbers for this particular job because it's so difficult to bend these timbers in position. They're often very large and they've got a big bend and edge set and twist, so using green timber helps to make that job a bit easier. The joint's going to be bolted, so it should be possible to tighten it up a little bit when it does open up. Alright, so I finished both the scarf joints. They've come out pretty well, so that's good. I was really hoping to bolt them together and plane these beams a little bit more before Checker and I leave for Christmas, which is happening very soon. But some other stuff came up and we had a lot of stuff to prepare for leaving, and so that's going to have to wait until we come back. But when we do come back, after these are planed and bolted, then it'll be time for them to go into the boat. That should be quite exciting. I have no idea really if it's even going to be possible to get these beams bent into the right shape and twisted. I'm probably going to be steaming them to get the twist. But anyway, it should be quite exciting. So there's that to look forward to. So thanks a lot for watching, and a massive thank you as always to everyone who's donated or otherwise supported the Tally-Ho project. It does make a huge difference, and it means I'm able to take the time to make and edit these videos, so I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.